That's fine. Hi, Alice.
That'd be thrilling. Hello.
Hi.
Alice is in Long Island. Another East Coast person.
And my friend Madeline is
Oh, hi, Madeline. Haven't
Hello.
seen you in a while. Did you get the PDF that I sent?
Thank
Okay,
you.
good. Okay, that's good. And Tamarah, I think, is here. Calvin, people show up at various times, and it's a
That's
small group, so we're casual.
that's fine.
Okay. I think maybe with Clarence's work, since you're a professor, you're going to be taking over the session. I'm just letting you know. I'm not doing it.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I'll join in every once in a while.
Do you want to, has everyone read his work? Is everyone familiar with?
Most people should be.
Okay.
I'm not saying that everyone will have read it, but most people should be familiar. Not necessarily familiar with his work, because his work is, as we know, is kind of difficult.
Yes.
So I don't know if everyone is familiar with his work, but they should have read the story.
Great. And
if they haven't, it's short enough for us to let them know what it is. Sort of. At least let them know the points of the story. But you can handle it like a class.
okay, I'll do my best. I'm on sabbatical, so I'm a little rusty, but
I am too. It's been a long time since I've been teaching. So don't worry about it. And besides, it's a good group. They ask questions. So not an issue. And since you're not the author, you're not held responsible for knowing everything about the story or whatever.
hey,
So don't worry about it. I'm trying to find. You never sent me your bio, you know?
oh, I thought you had the original bio from before.
I made up one. So
That's what I usually do.
there was one book that I think was forthcoming. I'm not sure. Is it out yet?
There's a book forthcoming. It's not out yet, but
Okay.
it will be out next year. So,
I know how that goes.
but I
It's,
am yeah.
it's too often with publishers you never can tell.
They haven't seen it yet. I've just I haven't wanted to let it go, but I'm sending
Oh, okay.
I'm sending it off at the end of the week.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just say forthcoming. Which one is that? Revolution? Is that the...
This is the one on Genius, and it's called Genius Loves Company.
Oh, I don't know that one. Why don't you talk about that one when you talk about yourself?
Sure.
Okay. I am looking here. What I have. So then Revolution is out?
No, the last book that was out was A More Perfect Reunion. And I think that's up on the Revolution book novel that'll be out in 2027. So that's the one on the operating table.
Okay. All right. So there are 4 novels.
There are 4 novels and one
Okay.
book of nonfiction currently out.
I don't know. I'll never catch up with you guys.
Not a race, not a race. So
No, I know, and I really appreciate that. You do what you have to do.
we just finished the Dancing with Langston and loved it. So
Oh, thank you.
no, thank you.
Thank
We were just talking about it the night before last. So I had
Oh.
Sharyn has a wonderful novel that came out in what year, Sharyn?
2019, I think.
Okay. It was just
And yeah, I'm working on another one, but I actually have stopped for a little while, and I'm working on short stories. I think doing this anthology has gotten. Oh, Chuck wants meeting code too. What is it with the meeting code?
The meeting code is 1888. It wasn't on your email, but I had to go back to a previous.
Right, it's not on the email because generally we don't need, or I don't need it. I don't know why it keeps showing up that you need
You
it.
needed to get on. I had to use it to get on.
Okay,
1888.
yeah. I'll let him know. Okay. Just so you know, the group, Stephanie is an actor
That's Stephanie.
and Ava is a lawyer
Alva.
and Tamarah is a writer and what happened? Oh, you switched. And Tamarah is my co-leader and she's also a poet, a writer, and she publishes poetry.
Nice to meet you.
And Alice, and we can't see Madeline. They are very interested in the arts and reading.
City high school teacher.
Oh.
English. Yeah, I was.
Okay.
That's what I retired from.
Oh, wonderful.
Great. I think your partner Sarah is she teaches in high school. Right?
She does. She also teaches English and history.
Yeah. Hi, Tamarah.
I'm sorry, I was rereading the story and I kind of got caught up in it.
It's easy to get caught up in it.
It's a lovely story. I enjoyed this more than I think any other. And so, yeah, I think it's me and my pen. So good morning.
Morning.
Okay, beware of Tamarah.
Sorry.
Oh, nice to have you.
No, we're just Tamarah, we're just fooling around.
So it's the same time as California.
We're waiting for Chuck to come on. I don't know. Why is he having a problem? It's hard to say.
Do you want me to call him?
Okay.
Okay, I'll go mute.
And Meredith and Bob aren't here. That's okay. It's good to see you, Madeline.
In New York.
Oh. We one time, Sharyn, we had dinner with Madeline.
Yes.
And then you and I, and then it was Madeline and one other woman, and we went to Tillis Center.
Yes, I do remember that.
Yes, yes. I think it was did we see an orchestra?
Yes, I remember that too.
Yeah, Lou.
I don't remember the name of the piece, but
Me neither. I just was so glad I could get you another ticket.
Yes, thank you. Stephanie, what happened?
He's having trouble getting in. He didn't have the meeting code, so I just gave it to him.
Oh, no.
I just sent it to him.
Well, he didn't. So he said he's trying again. So we should see him any minute. Do you want me to call Meredith or not? I called her yesterday. She didn't. I wonder if they're out of town. Are they in New York now?
No, I just saw them last night.
Oh, okay.
Who knows? Calvin, we record this and Tamarah at some point does she does an edit of it,
Mhm.
and she posts it. You do post it, right? You've been posting them?
Actually, I am all caught up, I think. I think I'm all
Oh,
caught up. And so I could post the link to the playlist in the chat, but it's really lovely. I think that it's very pretty.
the all of them. Yeah. It should be really interesting. It's almost a course in itself.
It really is. And I I mean, I've enjoyed going over all of the videos many times, but
Oh, you muted yourself.
of
You're-
course I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. In the chat is the
Oh,
link to the playlist. So
thank you. Okay.
Could I ask that it be emailed out? Because once we get off of this, I never find these chat things.
Unless you just take a picture of it.
Oh, there's that. I lost it again. Okay.
Okay. Hi, Chuck. You got on. I'm sorry about the code. I
It's
don't
okay.
know. I don't know what happened.
Thank you, Stephanie.
My pleasure.
Hello,
we-
Calvin.
Hi, Chuck. It's great
How
to
you
see you.
doing?
I'm well. And you?
Good, pretty good. It's good to see you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay, I think everyone's she.
Hello,
Hello, Chuck.
Alice. Hello,
Hi.
Alice. Good to see
Hi.
you.
Good to see you.
As you see, Calvin, it's a friendly group.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I'm glad you're here. Okay, why don't we get started? I just want to say, since we all know that Calvin Baker is filling in for Clarence Major, and I just want to say something about Calvin so that you know something about him. He's a novelist, an educator, an essayist, and an editor who's chronicled the African American experience from the colonial era to the present. He has published 4 very well-received novels, naming The New World, Once Two Heroes, Dominion, and Grace. Calvin's first nonfiction book, A More Perfect Reunion, was published in 2020. Esquire named him as one of the best young writers in America in 2005. Dominion was a finalist for the Hearst Wright Award, as well as one of Newsday's best books of the year. And Calvin is taught in the English departments at Yale, Columbia University's MFA program, and the American Studies department at the University of Leipzig in Germany. Calvin lives in Saratoga Springs and in New York, where he teaches at Skidmore College. Now, can you say something about Clarence?
Clarence Major, and I don't have Clarence's bio in front of me, but
That's okay.
Clarence, and I just want to speak from the heart. Clarence is, to my mind, a writer's writer. He is one of the writers, and this is, let me frame this. I'm writing a book about genius, specifically African American genius, and one of the definitions that I give to it, and there are many, but one is those artists who inspire the best of subsequent generations. And I can think of no better way to frame Clarence's work, as with Charles Johnson's, as one of those writers who's done so. And his influence spans from poets to novelists to short story writers. And he's just, I mean, he's well known, not well enough known to my mind, but he's a towering figure of the 20th century. And the way I read this book or this short story is in the context of the postmodern, which begins, and as all of you know, and some of you better than I, it's commonly thought to begin in prose in the 1960s. And there's a line in John Fowles's The French Lieutenant's Woman when he stops he stops the narrative, he stops the story and breaks the diegetic frame to say, I'm writing this in a moment when the writer is next to God. And then he begins to question the role of the writer, the role of the narrative. So it is destabilizing of his own authority, destabilizing of the authority of the novel, right? Usually we hear a story and we take it as complete. And right in that moment, Fowl stops it. He says, no, this is not complete. This is a fiction. And there's another consciousness behind the story that you're getting, and you should question that as well. And this set off a real revolution in the literary arts, certainly. And right in a moment when society as a whole is questioning authority, right? And authority in the form of government, right? Like we all know the lies that were being told about Vietnam. We know the lies that were being told about civil rights. We know the lies that were being told about the Cold War order, right? And this is happening all around the world. And so this story begins with an incident, and then we see in it a couple of digressions, right? Like inside the narrative, the author doesn't step out, but he's doing the same questioning and questioning truth, questioning the official version, right? So it's all on film. So of course the suspect must be guilty. And there's a blues song, so you're going to believe your lying eyes or me. And so he's right. We're looking at this thing, and then we begin to investigate the human interior behind it. So there's the question of motive. And when I'll back up. When I first, and I think the story was published in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And when I read the line, so many televised deaths lately, I immediately began to think of the police murders that were being captured on camera at that time and setting off, right, national protest. Now, and these protests, of course, rhyme with the protest, right, that began in Oakland in the 60s that gave rise to the Black Panthers. So my mind is immediately going to the question of police murders, but there's an inversion. And in the inversion, the suspect has killed a government official. Right. And so the question becomes, right, immediately why? And he's obviously guilty because we have it on film. He juxtaposes that to a lover's betrayal and a revenge fantasy. Right. And he goes through it twice. And then, right, and then his fantasy, like, right, is juxtaposed to the neighbors, Maxwell's. So in all of this, we're seeing betrayal, right? So you have the questions of betrayal, you have the questions of jealousy, you have the questions of veracity and the fallibility of narrative, right? And the official, right, the official truth of what's caught on camera. Is everyone with me so far?
Yeah,
Thank you. This
I
is
just
very
want to back
eloquent.
up a little bit, and I'll tell you, I used to think I knew what postmodern was, but the definition for that seems to be vague to me, is because it changes constantly. Is there some way that you can pin down a little bit what postmodern is?
That's a wonderful question, and the best answer I can give you is it's messy.
Right.
And because we see postmodernism in many forms. We see it in the literary arts, we see it in literary criticism, we see it in the visual arts, and we see it in music, and it takes slightly different meanings. And we also see it across a huge expanse of time. So if we take it as a creative movement, it begins with the destabilizing of the text, right, and textual authority, and it kind of extends to the historical. So, right, you'll hear some people talk of postmodernism as everything that happens after modernism. And right, and that will include things that are destabilizing. That will include things, right, where you're seeing, right, and by the destabilizing, like, right, you think of like the frames within the frame. And I don't know if anyone's read Tristram Shandy, but when you have like right, the story inside this, or 1001 Nights is another example. When we think of these stories within the story, each in conversation with the other. And right, and then as an historical matter, it comes to include, right, not only like those formal interventions, but also everything experimental. It like, and then it goes on to include certain attitudes toward authority, toward the world that we live in, right? That's where it like sort of like touches the historical. And so you think of, right, you think of a writer like Don DeLillo, and you think of the names, you think of White Noise, and right, where it becomes a condition and not just a form. And like as a condition, it becomes, right, one of this alienation from the facts of our lives. It becomes, right, when we think of the postmodern condition, we think of, I mean, I would go back to Marx, I go back to Jung, in the ways in which human life becomes this different thing. It becomes unmoored from the rhythms of life that people have experienced for tens of thousands of years, into this machine state come computer state.
Okay, well, I think you described exactly why this story is in a book called What's Next. Because it's yeah, it's a messy time. We're trying to figure out what it is. Chuck, did you wanted to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to Calvin. That was very eloquent in terms of the presentation of postmodernism, which is really kind of hard to nail down. But I think you're exactly right in terms of the spirit of Major's work and the techniques that he uses.
Thank you. And like Chuck is, as all of you know, like one of the great living writers in this country, and one of the great scholars of literature.
Too
And
kind. You're too kind. Okay.
okay, I'm going to tell this story, and it's
Yeah.
going to be a little embarrassing. But when I was a young writer, one of the first books that sort of set me on the path of being a writer was Charles's The Middle Passage. And then when I was right sort of in my career, I read Oxfording Tale, which just became a whole other door into the universe. So your work has like affected me greatly, sir.
Thank
And
you. Thank you. Oxford Tale is rather postmodern too. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
is and has
And
everyone
I just want to say that on the Atlantic's list, Oxfording Tale is one of the 136 best books in the United States. So, yeah, good choice there.
I hope it's very high on that list.
So
I
let me
don't
ask you a
know if
question.
it's by year. So who knows?
I'm not going to comment on that, but I want to ask Calvin a question. With this story, can you approach this the way you would a traditional story in terms of what happens next? I mean, what is our takeaway?
Okay, so this is like, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for it. And this is where I fell with the story. And it's the question of judgment is what I thought it was ultimately about, and judging one another, judging ourselves, judging, right, facts outside of the self. And so the story is, go to this line, says, further loss of spirit is what I feel. And the story, right, it's sliding into that loss of feeling, and it comes out, how can I be so sure he is, how can I be sure he is so innocent? How can I be sure I'm so innocent? And the story becomes an interrogation of the self ultimately. And the stable, right, the stable fact of the narrator, and right, and that's also mirrored in Maxwell, is this idea of, like, these ideas of jealousy, of violence, of rage, of betrayal and revenge. And if we take into the larger context of, right, what comes next, then, right, like, so then you, like, move out into the world, and right, in a moment wherein we're all so self-certain of our own truths, scare quotes. And if I don't, right, and the question is, if I'm not even sure of the truth about myself, if I have within me, right, like, if I have within me this jealous monster who can act in such ways, how can I judge others, right? How can I judge my neighbor Maxwell, right? Because Maxwell is guilty in my imagination, at least, of the same thing that I'm guilty of in my imagination. And right, and I dread seeing him. I dread coming into contact with that part of the self that I want to deny. And it's like, right, and it's come to life as fantasy, and right, in the same way everyone's shadow self, as like Freud would call it, is real and it comes to life. And so you start to say, okay, right, let's take it into the political sphere, and this moment of hardened, right, hardened ideologies, all propelled by the same human motivations, right? And these ideologies that say, like, oh, we can't speak to one another. These are hard facts, right? Like, and some of them are. And right, but this divide is greater than it's ever been. There, like, I'm repeating the sort of, right, the common, like, the common cliches that we hear about our own moment. And then we push, right, and they're all half true, right? This is a very perilous moment. It's a, right, it's a moment of indimensionality, if you will, in
Can
which,
I ask you something about that?
yes.
What he brings in is a lot of, I'm interested in media, okay? And he brings in a lot of media in this as another way of perceiving things. He starts out with a TV news show, and it goes on. There's another one, I think, later on in the story. He's also using a telephone. He's also looking at things from different angles. So to me, how do you, the question that I have is what you started with. How do you know what the truth is here? Because you're getting it from all of these different perspectives. You're getting it in this mediated fashion by TV and telephone, which was a lie when he called the police, or we think it was a lie. He's looking through a window. Everything, all of his perception seems to, or all of the narrative's perception seems to be mediated by something, even his own memory.
And right, and then there's the, right, the, like, the checking of the email, and
Yes.
right? So that's wonderful. And I would take that. So there are two things I want to say about it. And one is there are a couple of stable facts of the story. Like the critique of the police is constant. The jealousy is constant. The acts of violence are constant. And like, I want to come back to those. And his remove from the self and the first remove is right, the first and final removes actually are right, like why am I in, like why did I stay in that relationship so long, or why did I ever leave this one, like why did I say this relationship, I'm miserable, she's miserable, right? And so that's the first remove from the self, where we're living this life that is intermediated by all of these other things. And then when he sees Nydia again, and he asks himself the question, why did I ever leave this woman? And he's like, oh, right, I didn't love her. And which is funny, but it's also, I think it speaks to, and I don't want to call it a false self. I like the term that you introduced, Sharyn, of like the intermediated self, or the self whose experience is mediated by other frames. And right, like why I'm in this, well, we live in this frame of an apartment. And right, and I'm living a life inside of like right inside this domestic frame, and I'm not happy, and she's not happy. And then I'm constantly peering right out my window, looking for something, right? Looking to have my fears confirmed,
Which is
right?
framed, the
Right,
window.
exactly. Like the frame, and everywhere he looks, he gets, right, the narrator receives confirmation of his own worst fears. And so, right, and so the mediation isn't I would say like more than a mediation, it's almost everything is a mirror. So, right, like if we think of the window as only semi-transparent, or like, right, semi-reflective, like you're looking out, and part of what's coming back to is your own reflection, right, like because the events that you see are those that you've imagined, those that you fear and dread most.
I think I want to open it up to other questions or comments that other people might have. Tamarah, Stephanie.
I would be more than happy to just listen to you discuss this for the hour, because it's just such a rich text of I think that you could just go on forever because there's so much in here. The way that I approached it, I'm a poet, and I publish poetry. And so when I was looking at this first, is how does the language use the story? And so at the very beginning, it says, Nadia and I are watching television. And so now when I begin this, it feels like the author is telling me something. And so now I'm in the story. And so now that I'm engaged, my emotions are now part of the story. And so it's this use of parallelism of frustration of the truth. And I think that right now I'm doing a study with a group on Arabic poetry. And it was so interesting because it laid out exactly what is not allowed in Arabic poetry, just briefly, is vagueness and complexity and exaggerated strangeness and the absurd. And these are not allowed in Arabic poetry because these all deviate from the truth. And the entire purpose of poetry is to find the truth and to discover the truth of the self so that it can communicate to other individual selves. And so when you read this, it has the vagueness and the complexities. And so what the language is doing is it's complicating the truth. And I think that as you were saying, it's destabilizing the truth. And so we don't know. It's like I said that the Volta was on page 141 when he said, had the gunman not arrived, what would have happened? And that is what I took with me through every word is we don't know, because language is fallible. And we can see that in the facts. It's like you could say the fact, but it's not really a fact. You could say the fact at the end, it's not really there. Even at the very end, he was trying to describe to the police, but the words didn't come out. And so it's this fallibility of the language that we cannot rely on the language to even reflect our true self or the truth of what's happening. And so you have this repetition of how can we even defend our innocence? How can someone even defend themselves against emotions or against something that they see when everything we see is through a screen or through a window or through a telephone? And then the language that we use to describe that isn't even something that we can rely on. And so then as the reader, now you're frustrated that at the end you're like, I don't really know. And then you look at yourself and you're like, do I even know anything about myself? Do I even know anything about what I see? And it's this just forced questioning. And this is the entire purpose of fiction, is what are you not seeing? And there are so many visibles, and the invisibles are what define that. And so it was the use of the language to try and get that across to the reader. And so that's that's one of the things that I was writing. And so how would you say that the language is part of the character? I thought that language really was the motif.
This is wonderful. I want to come back, like before I answer that question, I want to come back, if I may, to something you said earlier about being a part of the story. And I want to ask, what was everyone's emotional response to the story? I hear uncertainty and then self-scrutiny.
I was
What
very angry, so it was all very negative emotions.
Confusion, basic confusion. If you approach it from a filmic point of view as storytelling, you don't know what is real or what isn't, and in what is in his imagination, and what, if from a character stand, what are his I wants? What does he want? And that is kind of indefinite and confusing. And apparently he's living so much in his imagination and mind that he is creating, it seems that he's creating scenarios that may or may not exist. And as the readers, we don't know for sure.
Okay.
And then at the end of the story, he's back, his relationship with Nadia is sketchy, to say the least. Whether he loves her or doesn't, he cannot communicate with her. That's apparent. He falls into her arms and he's crying and he can't communicate what's wrong. And then at the very end, he's left with this, would I say paranoia? This fear of what happens next. What's next with Maxwell in the house? That now that he knows it exists.
Great, great, great. So when we talk about the love affair, it's a classic sort of two-panel, like, right, we'll get his side, we'll get her side, but we're only getting one side of it. And so everything becomes a mirror, like a reflection entwined with that consciousness. And it like, right, and it left you confused. It's great. What were the other emotional responses here?
Unmute yourself, please.
I said I was never sure of anything, but he has a line, had the gunman not arrived, what would have happened? So, and then of course that, like the first story, the next morning, the TV news had this story on of the two deaths. So there is an impression here that the deaths were true and that Nadia was dead, that she had been killed in that car, that everything after that sentence, had the gunman not arrived, what would have happened, is his imagination. But what preceded that sentence had some level of truth.
Okay.
But do we know? No.
And what was the feeling? And I'm asking this feel like I'm really curious.
A
about this.
feeling of a feeling of confusion. I did wonder what was the writer's purpose in writing the story. What did he want to get out of this, or what did he want to convey? If he wanted to convey, which I would agree with, that we never really know for sure what's what happened, who people are, what's really happening. Everything is seen through our eyes and our interpretation. Does that make it true? I don't know.
And then
I
also,
don't have an answer.
yeah, the other aspect of it, whenever I read a story, is how much do I care?
That was another thought I had.
And it's hard to care about this man. There's no, or Nadia for that matter.
Right.
It's more if she exists or not exists or whatever. It seems in a way you're seeing somebody in the throes of a massive breakdown of sorts. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I can possibly help or judge or know even what I'm seeing, but it seems that here is one upset individual incapable of a relationship with a real or imagined Nadia, and is just bouncing off of what he perceives to be the news of what's going on in society, and to the point of other human beings. If Maxwell exists, the police apparently do come, but he has no interconnection even with being able to communicate with the police. And now he will only live in his imagination of this perceived fear. Gosh knows what he's going to do next. What's going to happen?
We've had a lot of stories having to do with characters and their motivations, and what, and what as maybe real people, if they were real people, what they might expect or want, or all of this. This is a different kind of story. And I think that when Calvin started out, this is why I asked him to talk a little bit about postmodernism, because when he started, I think that he mentioned some things about the use of various tools that postmodernists have to present a story. And this is a different kind of story. Maybe you can say a little bit more about it, Calvin?
Well, I want to, and yes, thank you. I want to say this, and and this is why I'm so interested in how everyone read it, because whatever kind of story we're reading, it's the reader who completes the story.
Yes.
And so we're seeing, right, this authorial consciousness, or we're seeing like the narrator, but it's like the act is completed by what we think we're seeing. And this idea of, right, like, okay, now, and I love that, he's pulled me into the story, and I'm viewing him as, right, this sort of paranoid delusional who is unsympathetic. I'm reading him as asking me to interrogate myself. I'm reading him, right, as, despicable, unlikable, like, right, self-questioning. And so if we take that, it's like the question's like, what am I bringing to the story? What am I bringing to the story? And when I look at the story, I see all of these things. I also can't help but miss, and right, because so many of Major's stories are set in Chicago, they like, and they are, right, so many are chimeric, and
Chicago heat is where it's from.
yes, and I love that one in the right in the essays. And so I, like, as a black man, you're like, I read that and I'm like, I'm really attuned to the police presence. I'm really attuned to this encounter between blackness and authority. I'm really attuned to, right, all of these things. And then I start, like, and I go to, oh, well, the, like, right, the officials have betrayed this perpetrator in some way, or he feels betrayed by officialdom. And right, and so that is what might, in my imagination, sort of led him to this act, right? It's like the lying government. And I think of, right, and then, right, there's like it's caught in film, but you think like, oh, but there's so many official narratives that are, right, like inscribed in some sort of like unquestionable and some unquestionable frame that are in fact false. And that's, I just might be, you know, a leftist, but right, that's one place that I'm aware of my own mind going when I read it. And of course, I'm going, like, I'm going to the postmodern and like the questions of truth, the questions that so many of you have of knowability. I was less concerned with like the sort of like sympathy for the narrator or lack of sympathy. I feel a certain amount of sympathy in the beginning. And these are just, right, these are my naive impressions. And right, or like my first responses as readers, which is the way that we all encounter any story, any work of art, right? And so there's all that we know, but we're also having this naive response, right? The unmitigated response of our own consciousness encountering the text. And right, I'm too numb to react. A further loss of spirit is what I feel. And I am reading it, right? And so I am reading it in the frame of the moment. It could just be me, but right, this is 2016. I believe George Floyd was 2015. So I think of that as somehow, right, obliquely informing the entire narrative. And if we like, right, in oblique in this way of watching the television in that moment, like, right, never mind the inversion, never mind the sort of postmodern pyrotechnics, like, right, just seeing something and asking yourself that like great Marvin Gaye question, what's going on? And right, and then bringing these different answers to it, or these different essays like toward a truth or lack of truth.
I think when I read it, that's what I was looking for. What is the truth? How do we know? My question was, how do we know what the truth is? I wasn't so concerned about the characters' motivations or how they felt or any of that. I was looking at the puzzle that was created in this story. And we're hit constantly with ways of seeing. He's looking through binoculars. He's looking at television. He's looking through the frame of a window. There's constant perception here, and it's always distorted in one way or another. So my question was, how do we know what the truth is? How can we ever know what the truth is? Because we're always seeing it through some other thing. You know, at least in this story, this is how it's being presented to me. The other thing is time. He seems to be fluctuating with time. Like, what if this happened then, but it's now, and then it was before, and he's constantly going back in time, even within the same paragraph, maybe even the same sentence. I would have to take a look, but time is also vague. We don't know the time sequence here. She suddenly arrives in California, like when? And Stephanie, I think you had you wanted to say
No,
something.
I was just going to agree with that completely. We don't even know for sure what is real. If
Exactly.
really, if any of it is real, because the murder that he witnesses Maxwell's, first you would get the impression that it's Nadia and Maxwell making love or something that he's hearing, and it attracts him to go look in the window. But then when he sees the murder with the knife, is that even real? Then he sees Nadia on the beach, and falls into her arms hysterically crying, and he can't even talk to her or tell her what or why, but he is able, we think, to call the police. And did they really come? And did he call? I don't know if any of it is what is real. The only thing that you're left with at the very end is he's alone with his imagination.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Are we all left with that in a way? Because
Yep.
how do we get information? Let's let Chuck say something.
No, I just have a simple question. Does the title give us a clue to what the story is about?
It did to me, in that he probably is making this all up. And that's what it seemed to me, that he was in fact innocent, but his emotional content, if we look at it as character, his guilt, his jealousy, and all this stuff is making him feel less than innocent. Also, he might, because of the police factor, which Calvin brought in, he might be presumed guilty, even though he's innocent. All of these
You're taking it in the sense of almost a legal sense, innocent or guilty. I was thinking of it innocent, the loss of innocence in a particular way.
Okay.
The loss, a kind of naivete that's shattered and leads to a feeling of emptiness. Is that a possibility?
Yes.
And paranoia.
Yeah.
Because now he's going to be obsessed about worrying about what's going to happen with that. He knows that house exists, and he knows in his mind what he saw. So his innocence is completely shattered by the experience of, in his mind, seeing the murder or not seeing the murder.
And I saw it from the perspective of a child, because in childhood innocence, you don't have consequences. And I don't think that there were consequences that he had here. It was a lot of possibly daydreaming. And I think that as a child, you look out into the world and you create your own reality in your head. And so at the end, he wasn't able to even express what he thought he saw. And so I thought that that was a childhood just perspective of the world of, I don't really know what's actually happening. Even when he was pulled over by the police, he's like, I'm just not going to say anything because I don't know what's going to happen. And so that's how I was perceiving it.
Calvin?
I have a thought that I'm going to hold.
Okay.
Actually, I want to turn. I can't resist the opportunity to turn your question of truth back to Chuck, who is an epistemologist, and you're asking, how can I know? Like, how can we know the truth? And I wanted to put this question of like, what is truth, to Chuck, and then I want to come back to the story, because it is right. It's all made up. Right? Like everything's like, right, we're talking about these digressions and these fantasies, but in what happened and what didn't, like, is it real, is it not real? But we're inside a frame of a story, so like the entire thing is a fiction. But I think there are some I think there are enough hints that there are things that are actually grounded in the emotional fact of the story. But yeah, first one has to talk about truth.
Oh my goodness, what's the question? This is epistemology. What is truth? There's a lot of ways you could kind of talk about that. There's at least 4 theories of truth, right? The correspondence theory that science uses, the phenomenological theory, which is truth is something that appears, is disclosed. There's the coherent theory of truth, in which case truth is within a system that is coherent. And then there's a pragmatic theory of truth. I don't think this fits any one of those necessarily. I'm a fairly traditional storyteller. I experimented with surf fiction and metafiction and all that when I was younger. But I really think for me, I need a story. And the story has to answer the questions it raises. And I come out of the story not as clean as I went in. There is something emotional that's going to be moved around in me, but there are certain things we can agree upon in terms of what happened next, why did it happen? You know, those old journalistic questions: who, what, why, when, how, where, so forth and so on. So I'm very traditional in my approach, or I became more that way. Major was part of what was called the Fiction Collective. And that was a collection of writers, Sukanik, Russell Banks, many others, who were having difficulty publishing their work with New York trade publishers. So they started the Fiction Collective, writers publishing each other. And I just wonder if there's a hunger sometimes that people have for just a story well told, with clarity, that interprets the world, and there's something we can take away and hang on to. And the experimental stuff doesn't really do that for me. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I will say, for Clarence's work, there are a number of stories in this book that are more traditional. I chose this one because I think it really speaks to the time. We're in a confused time, and we're trying to figure out how to find some sort of truth in it. And that's what I see in this story, and that's why I chose this one. How do we know? We're bombarded constantly with information.
Well,
but how does it add up?
More specifically to what you're saying, we have a hard time right now even agreeing on facts.
Right.
Between the right and
That's
the
my
left.
point.
We have we have a conflict of interpretations, and people getting into their little echo chamber and only taking in information that confirms their conspiracy theories or whatever the case might be.
Yes.
So there may be a political dimension to the epistemological question that is very much with us today.
And this is why I go back to this question of the emotional truth that each of us as readers take away, because there are things that I would say are stable enough in the story that they constitute the real subject matter, right? I think that the killing on television is real. I think there is a betrayal in the narrator's life, and that doesn't necessarily play out on the fact pattern that's represented, or like the narrative that's represented, but the emotional heart of the story is so much about this betrayal that it constitutes the not quite subtext, but the emotional text of the narrative. And in my reading, if that makes sense. And it's like, okay, if you're telling a story about a lover who cheats on you in so many different ways, and you get and you're fantasizing so many different ways of revenge, at some place off stage, right? Off the stage of the story, not off the stage of the author's life, but off the stage of the story, there really is a kind of betrayal, because the fact of jealousy is so recurring, right? Nydia's nature is unchanged. She in his imagination, right? And so we're thinking, okay, she betrays me this way, she betrays me that way, there's some kind of betrayal going on here. Is that possible, or is that just me?
Is that also in his imagination? Because we don't really know as readers whether or not she betrayed him or not. There's no evidence. And the innocence is presumed. Maybe it's presumed innocence, Chuck, but maybe she's presumed innocent. I don't know. Maybe that's it, because there's no evidence of any kind that there's a betrayal, and that she follows him to California. You know, how does she even know where he lives? He doesn't know any of this. He doesn't know how, if he gave her his number, any of this. It's just a blur.
And so I would take that like what Chuck said about our political echo chambers, wherein people are arguing over facts or inventing facts. And I would say like all those invented facts and conspiracy theories are intended to support an underlying emotional reality. And right, even if it isn't true in the world, I will make up facts that fit what I feel to be true, which right we all do as a matter of course. And so it becomes wish fulfillment, dread fulfillment, and right, and then like we'll make the facts fit. We'll tell ourselves a narrative, a conspiracy that confirms the underlying emotional reality.
Right, we fill in the narrative. Madeline, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say when you earlier it was brought up, what's innocent? What is, innocence? How does that mean? The title, I can check suggested that. In the first paragraph, he refers to a suspect in quotation marks. He's setting us up at that point for the fact that truth just isn't exactly truthful all the time. And then he says the suspect said he's innocent despite the fact that the cameras caught him in the act. So we have, it's believe your own eyes, not necessarily. Okay, so right then, he set us up in this idea that you can see, or you think you see, but he says he's innocent. All right, so I really thought maybe it should have been innocence with a question mark as the title. And the dead, the presumably dead Nadia says to him in that moment after he said, had the gunman not arrived, what would have happened? And he resupposes what would happen if she'd returned home and he could talk to her. And she said, she waves me away. There you go again with your jealousy. So this is a recurrent theme in their lives. So we don't know who sees what sees who. You just don't know. His life is in his mind. And I couldn't help thinking that at the end, and I don't know, my geography may be off, but some of his geography, when he's living in California, he's walking on Fisherman's Wharf, which would put him in San Francisco, but he's describing terrain that would more put him into Los Angeles or other flatter areas. He's got beach houses in hills. There's so much that's so off in this that it's an extremely confusing mind. That it's I begin to feel the two things that are caught on film, because the murder of the two people, I couldn't help. I used to live on between 8th and I used to live in a building that had an exit on 9th. The main entrance was on 9th, and the other exit was 8th Street. So when he got down to the village, I couldn't help but fall in love with the story. But it just, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. If you want to go real, what's reality? It's not focused in reality. And how does a dead Nadia get to California to begin with if she's dead?
But could that be the point, Madeline?
What?
To me, that is what the point. We don't really, we're kind of in a time of transition here, or a time when some of our institutions are not what they used to be. Some people want to go back to yes, I'm being kind about it.
Except this was 2016. This is a little before we could know where the world was how the world was
I would, to me, after 9/11, things changed quite a bit, especially around the Northeast because I was there, and I know the attitude, the feeling of the place changed. We became more vulnerable. We didn't know. We weren't sure about who we were at that point. How could we be attacked? How could these things happen?
Mhm.
And things were confused during that time period. And they're becoming more so in some ways. So I'm not defending the story because I certainly understand. I've read other work by Major, and believe me, this one is fairly straightforward compared to some of the others. But and to, with all due respect to his work, he has changed. He's become a lot more traditional. But at the same time, I really think that this story represents a lot of those elements that are coming in. We don't know how to trust our own emotional content. We don't know how to, we don't know if we should trust the news that we see. I personally, as Chuck knows, I look at various news sources to try to figure out, well, which one might be telling me something, or how do I come to my own conclusion from it? So we're getting all of these inputs. And how do we make sense of it?
Right, it's just, I think he
Story
was,
is not,
he was
to
seeing
me,
into the future.
I'm sorry.
I think he was predicting a more confused time than perhaps 2016. A lot of, I think what we're talking about, I don't know, that's my impression, came after 2016, a lot more of it. I mean, I know the 9/11 portion, certainly I'm here on the East Coast, but
The crack up of reality came in 2016.
yeah, it arrived
The
in the
lack
White
of
House.
consensus and the lack of truth telling happened in 16.
Right, it came forward, so I don't, it might depend on what day in 2016 he wrote the story. And I'm not saying this story has merit, but I'm just saying, I guess part of it is I worked with teenagers. So I'm used to dealing with literature that, you know, and the questions the kids would ask, that kind of thing. I think more along those lines of how do we discuss this with them, because they see the world differently than we do at this point. In our age.
I understand that. I agree with you. And with that, a more traditional story would definitely work better. But there were a number of very traditional stories in this book. This one just happens to be.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. But
Complicated
there were
on
a couple of others. I know, Cal. I just want to say there were a couple of others. The last one we had by, who is that? By Joanna Scott. There was a question of what was real here. Did she really experience the destruction of a painting? You know, we didn't know that. So there are a number of stories that we had that were leading up to this question of how do we know what we can call real? There was another one too that was a little Pamela Painter's story in which she was dealing with identity, where someone made up, as the story went along, she made up a new self for herself. She made up a new life for herself. So there were a number of stories that had to do with that. And I think there are writers who are doing this because this is the time we're in. You know, we're expressing what's going on during this time. Calvin, you wanted to say something.
And I have a couple of things. And the first one asks, has everyone read the works of J.M. Coetzee?
No.
Coetzee is a South African novelist and essayist who won the Nobel Prize in, I'm going to get the date wrong, but I believe it was around 2010, so plus or minus. And Coetzee is one of the great postmodernists working, and he writes these political allegories, political metafictions, and they're like, right, they're interrogations of different truths. And one of the books that I'm thinking of is called Foe. And Foe is, right, it's about Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe, and his birth name was Daniel Foe. And in the novel, has anyone read it before?
I think I have. I think you're ringing a bell with me with this. Yeah.
And so in the novel, like Friday, like takes a more central place, and Friday becomes a real person, and there is a moment when, right, like the author of the story is asking Friday a question. Friday in the narrative's imagining is like never speaks, right? So he is a mute, and at some point there's a frustration, and he opens Friday's mouth and his tongue has been severed, right? Friday can't speak, and that becomes a symbol of the voiceless. It becomes a symbol of, it becomes a symbol of colonialism. It becomes a symbol of literary history in some ways, and the ways that it's entwined with colonialism. If we think of, does everyone remember Robinson Crusoe? And in which, you've got a castaway, an English castaway on an island, and and then like a devoted manservant, Friday, who is a sort of or other. He's a native, and and so like that story would never play in the politics of today. And it's like, okay, well, what does Friday have to say? And I'm thinking of Percival Everett's new novel, James, in which he does this literary reimagining of Jim from Huckleberry Finn. And so it is like truths that we can't access, right? Or that may not be ours to receive. So I'm just invoking Coetzee as someone who I believe is working at an extremely sophisticated level with postmodernism, and even takes it to a level where it begins to merge with a different kind of truth, right? We're scrambling narrative meaning, and scrambling and asking ourselves what we can know and what we cannot know. This story, in some ways, it doesn't allow the reader any kind of catharsis, right? Or any kind of transcendence. It comes back to this first question of like innocence and knowability. And if we take that into our own political frame, and the trope, America's lost its innocence, occurs and reoccurs, and when we assume ourselves to be innocent as a nation, as individuals, but we are so entwined with all of these acts that are anything but innocent, and yet we never, they're always occluded from sight, or they're comfortably removed. And so if I put this story back in its historical frame, which I'm just so tempted to, it's like catnip for me. And we're asking ourselves this question of what's next. We're if we're all telling ourselves our own truths, if we have political camps of right now our own facts, I don't think that's a new thing in American life. Right. I think we can go back to the Continental Congress and see these different factions of different truths, different interpretations of liberty, of law. We can certainly extend it to the Civil War, right? Well, we've got these two sort of hardened belief systems that continue to inform the country, that I think are almost linear in their progression. and we arrive to our own moment, right? Or if we arrive to this moment at 2016, and we're asking these questions, these more like these compound questions of guilt and innocence. And right, this question of what am I guilty of in my own imagination? Like, what wrong has been done to me? What is the person who did it? Right? What's the narrative of the person who did it? Right? There's like, because we have this question of Nydia's culpability, but also Nydia's unhappiness. And and so like if we extend all of it, like right to bear with me, if we extend all of it back into the world, right? If we extend it first into like our own interiors, our own like right self-interrogations, and then right again into the world, right? What is my like what is my own innocence or culpability in the right in this act of mediation, in this act of viewing, in this right like where am I in this story? And right to the question of what's next, I always think that that is a question of authorship. And what we like, what's next is what enough people author as next on a large scale, but also on the individual scale.
I'm glad you brought that up to put it in this larger context, because that's pretty much how I saw this story, that it represents the time greatly and this moment in history. Some people have been quiet. Is there anyone else who would like to say something? Ava.
Well, I have to say the writer, the novelist of this story is clever, and whether he is innocent, who is innocent, who is not, whether the system is justice or not, it's just all made up, confused, and create confusion and frustration. Therefore, in the reality, if we try to pin on the truth, it's just impossible. It is a perception. Some interpret as a facts, and more is about how you see it, what is your belief. Back to Kevin's mentioning of this African Americans writer and reinterpret Friday in his novel, and about the voice and the voiceless. However, in Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe's, whether Friday has a voice or not, he has a personality, and two of them, superior and inferior, they become friends. They become so loyal and truthful to each other. So in that sense, I don't know. Of course, you put the story in the larger context with the political aspects and police and justice, all that. But fundamentally, in the real life, it is about your relationship, your emotions, your friendship, your families, and whether he has a voice or not. Depends on who he hang out with. And in Daniel Defoe's, they are friends. So it's not that you really have to assert your voice in the society in order to be recognized, be accepted, be acknowledged. It's truly about the story, the experience and how truthful you are to yourself. And this guy in the story Innocence. And I think Dr. Johnson mentioned that the loss of innocence, probably he's not innocent at all. Nobody is innocent here. And it's a loss, it's a confusion.
Ava, I know that you're not this kind of lawyer, but can I ask you, if you were confronted by a person like this, how would you discern what the facts are? How would you do a case with this person? And maybe
That,
that's not fair to ask you because I know that you don't.
yeah,
do that.
I'm not a litigator, I'm not a
Right.
criminal law lawyer. However, being trained in law school for so long and being in practice for so long, I think one way or another, whether it's truth or facts, you just have to subject yourself to the system, to the frame. In Chinese, we have this saying that in the family, there are 10 of them, 10 Ks or 12 of them. There's only one person that is in control as mother or father. It's not the democratic situation, but bottom line is if we want to live all together, there is a system you just have to susceptible to or subject to.
And I love that, Barbara, and bringing it back to like, right, the law and right, legal, like, right. So there's a family belief system and you subject yourself to it. What happens if this person in charge, mother or father, is cruel and unjust? And you rebel.
And so who is a judge of cruelty and versus rebelling? It's again, it is to the individual's emotions and perception. And from parents' point of view, they think they should discipline their kids, and for their kids, they don't accept it. They have a voice and they have their rights. So really, it's such a subjective point that there's no definition of truth. It's totally up to individuals' perception.
If
Or
we,
maybe philosophically there is a truth, as in philosophy.
so if we
Chuck,
take this
how do you think about that?
I don't know
think
what
she's
I'm talking, but
I-
I just see it complicated and impossible. There's so many. Still, I don't understand what is postmodernism. And Sharyn, you mentioned the techniques, certain tools. This writer write this story. I don't have a good handle on what tools he used.
so I'll let Chuck go, but I think
No, I just have a question. You were talking about truth. Is 2 + 2 = 4 truth? Is E equals MC² truth? Or is it all subjective? The scientific method tries to deal with this question of verifiability, objective truth. I just throw it out there to see what you might think. I mean, if we can't rely on certain rigorous statements, then what can we rely on?
But as you know, science changes all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. But 2 + 2 = 4. Now, in Brave New World, no, I'm sorry, 1984, 2 + 2 could equal 5. But that's because the state wills it to
Right.
be so.
And I would love to bring us to the final paragraph. And there was a few phrases that I just outlined. He says, I am alone here again. It is not as before when I was unaware. Oh, I knew a house was over there. now. And that's how he ends, is he's telling us this is not how it was before. This is a new awareness. The new awareness is sinister, and that's how he ends. And so that's how I completed the story was, yeah.
Yes. Calvin, go ahead.
I have a question. Can we read this story as allegory?
Of course. Yes.
As not, right, as not concerned with, right, like, as not concerned, right, and so many stories are not concerned with the one-to-one truth, as some stories are myths, and some stories are fables, and some stories are allegories. Is this story in any way allegorical?
Allegory for what?
Well, if we take it back, could it be an allegory for an historical social moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how I assume I took it that way. Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Could
And
that
so
be
if it's
today?
an allegory for that, like, right, for 2015, 2016, what is he saying?
How about 2024?
I would agree with you, Madeline. I think it's been ongoing.
Okay. And so what is he saying? What is this allegory if we read it on that plane?
What do you think, Calvin? What's an allegory of a time, a moment?
Time, a moment, a system, right? Of systems that we all live into. And I love what Barbara did, because then you have a comparativist question, and right, like systems that are assumed to be just, as opposed to systems that we know, right, and that, right, it's part of our political reality as Americans, and certainly as, like, sort of people, progressives, that, like, right, we assume that our systems are imperfect and that their effects on people can do harm, and that sometimes our actions, like, right, are authored as much by this unseen hand as by ourselves. And so if you take it as an allegory, right, let's assume it's an allegory of police murder that's been inverted. And we just, right, and you've got, right, because we can kind of tie that to this, like, apprehension of driving while black, which was the precipitating fact of so many of the police murders that we're aware of. And then asking this question of innocence and guilt in that context. And right, and then the larger political is, the police are in fact on camera, and maybe we saw an act of, like, aggression from a suspect, and right, or maybe we've seen the police kill in cold blood, and then say, I'm innocent, but I'm innocent. And then asking ourselves this question of who pulls the trigger in that encounter. Certainly it's the individual, but if then if we use our sort of fictive imaginations, it's like, okay, it's a cop, but this cop has a life, and he's got a family that he probably loves, and he's got problems like everybody else, and he's also part of this system. And right, and I'm not trying to make an argument for lack of culpability, right, of either the police or his victim, but I'm asking this question of what, like, how much is that action authored by, right, the imagination, the unseen, like, right, all the unseen forces within us? How much is it authored by larger systems? How much is it authored by our own nature.
Those are good questions. Very good.
And isn't the purpose of fiction to pose these questions instead of to answer them? So I would say that I think that this is a wildly successful story that poses a lot of questions.
Is there anything else that anyone would like to say?
I think we need time to ponder these questions.
Yes, I think so too. And I've obviously I've allowed us to go over time because I think it's been really a good discussion. And is there anything you'd like to say, Calvin?
No, thank you for having me. This has been a pleasure. And and we've turned through the possibilities as we always do when we encounter a piece of art. And and we do take away these great questions to ponder. But I think some of them can be nailed down on like subsequent readings.
If we can nail down what postmodernism is in the first place.
Thank you all. This has been a joy for me.
Yeah. And thank you for being
Calvin.
here.
Thank you,
Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.